G'day everyone, have you heard or maybe even thought yourself since the balance patch on June 27th that Untamed Rangers are no longer viable in solo content due to the loss of Fervent Force, our favourite solo trait? Well, I'm here to show you that Untamed Rangers are still fantastic in solo content, with the build I've got for you today which can comfortably solo Legendary Bounties and pretty much any other solo content you can throw at it. The way this build works is that it uses high strike damage from a power build to do massive damage and ridiculous self-healing from the trait Restorative Strikes. This trait was also changed considerably in the balance patch on June 27th, but nobody's really talking about it yet. Before the patch it was a passive 5% leech, which was fairly undertuned and never really used. Now it's a massive 33% leech based on strike damage for a 4-second window every time we unleash. This trait does absurd self-healing and will basically top your health bar fully every time you use it, especially on multiple targets. The best part is, you can do this insane self-healing every 10 seconds. So let's dive into the build and see how it works. Alright everyone, so this is the main build I always use in open world as Untamed. I'll post a build editor link in the video description with everything I'm about to go through. Honestly, I never change anything here. The only things you could play are Strider's Strength if you use the sword a lot, and the new sword skills are very strong, so that's a good option to have. Otherwise, if you love the Longbow, you could take Lead the Wind, mostly for the piercing and cooldown reduction, but otherwise, I don't ever change anything here. For a more survivable alternative that loses a little bit of damage, you can play Nature Magic with these talents here. This gives you a bunch of regen and protection and vigor. Regen from here, protection and vigor from here every 20 seconds when you use your beast skill, which is really nice. And then your pet will stay alive longer with some boom sharing, and you'll get a bit more concentration. For weapons, I recommend going double axe primarily with either a longbow or sword in the offhand, depending what you prefer. Generally, I think double axe is the best. It has good strike damage, some extra bleeding from axe 2 and 3, a disable on axe 4 to trigger our quickness, and a powerful burst for AoE and single target on axe 5. Most importantly though, axe 1 Unleashed Ambush, Sundering Volley, is just downright amazing. It hits 5 targets within a 900 yard range in any direction with a potent double tap that does great damage, bleeding, vulnerability, and immobilizes. This ability alone is the main reason I love axes for this build. Thanks to natural fortitude in our Untamed tree, the direct healing potential from this alone is massive, and when it's used during our Restorative Strikes window, we get just absurd self-healing, especially if cleaving multiple targets. The new sword skills are very strong and have good sustained single target damage. If you prefer a ranged option, the Longbow is a great option for some burst abilities. Skills I recommend are Unnatural Traversal, Exploding Spores, Quickening Zephyr, and Forest's Fortification. The first three are taken mainly for the different boons that they give, being Might, Regen, Protection, and Quickness, as well as a Stun Break on Quickening Zephyr, and an additional Disable on Exploding Spores. Forest Fortification is taken as a massive defensive ability, which can be used either proactively or reactively, depending on the situation. If you don't feel you need the extra defensive from Forest's Fortification, you can just take Strength of the Pack for an extra offensive, which gives you some more boon uptime. For gear, you have a few options. As a power build, you can get away with a simple Berserker setup for maximum damage and burst self-healing. I personally prefer Diviners for solid power damage, but with the added bonus of 60 to 70% boon uptime, which contributes significantly to our damage and survival due to the amount of might, quickness, and protection uptime we have in this build. As for runes, you can use Rune of the Scholar, which is standard for most power builds, but for solo content I actually prefer Fireworks, as it gives a decent boost to power, as well as good boon uptime for sustained solo combat. For weapon sigils, I use Concentration and Frailty, which is now really good due to the Defiance changes it always procs. Otherwise you can just use Force like normal power builds. For the rotation, I won't go through a strict line-by-line rotation, because in solo open world content the opportunity for that is rare at best. Instead, a simple priority for your abilities should be followed, which is to use Axe 2 and 3 on cooldown for the best damage, Axe 4 for quickness, and Axe 5 when you can get the full channel off in melee range. Teleport and Spores should be used on cooldown for damage and boon uptime. Zephyr can be saved for the stun break if you think you'll need it, or send it for the quickness on cooldown. What I do want to focus on here is the cyclical nature of this build and specialization, which you would need to pay attention to and master, or it will be difficult to survive. This 10-second cycle revolves around the 10-second internal cooldown of Restorative Strikes and 9-second internal cooldown of your Unleash Ambush skills. Thankfully, these naturally align to give us a 10-second cycle. Quickly, I'll mention the Pet Unleashed Ambush skills. These are all usable nearly simultaneously, so you can just always send Pet 1, 2, 3 immediately together, which all provide some soft CC mitigation and conditions, and they are relevant, these abilities, to our 10-second cycle, as they give us a good idea of a timer. It's important to understand that Restorative Strikes triggers every 10 seconds on the next Unleash, whether it be you or your pet, whereas our Unleashed Ambush skill only triggers when unleashing to the Ranger every 9 seconds. Our aim to achieve maximum damage, but more importantly massive self-healing, is to use our Unleashed Ambush skill during the Restorative Strikes window. Generally, we will be sitting in Unleashed Ranger stance by default for more damage. I call this the offensive cycle, which means every 10 seconds we want to unleash to our pet. This will trigger the Restorative Strikes window. Immediately use Pet 1, 2, and 3, and then unleash straight back to the Ranger, which will trigger our Ambush skill, which we can use immediately, followed by Axe 2 or 3 during the leech window. This offensive cycle rotation does waste about a second of the Restorative Strikes while we unleash to the pet and back, but as long as you fit the Sundering Volley into the leech window, you'll have plenty of healing, and maybe time to squeeze an Axe 2 as well. You will need to mentally keep track of the 10-second cycle, which you get used to. But a good tip is to use the cooldown of Axe 3 as a guide because it's also 10 seconds. The alternative way is what I call the defensive cycle, which is where the damage is so high we want to keep our pet unleashed by default for the 25% damage reduction. This means every 10 seconds you want to unleash to the Ranger, triggering both Restorative Strikes and Ambush at the same time, meaning we don't waste a second of leech. So you can immediately send the Ambush skill for huge healing with 25% increased damage while unleashed, fit in Axe 2 and 3 into the leech window, and then unleash straight back to the pet after 4 seconds. This is more user friendly because you can use the Pet 1 and 2 skills as your exact 10-second counter. Every time they are ready, simply use them, immediately unleash, sending Axe 1, 2 and 3, then switch back. If you execute this cycle perfectly, you're nearly unkillable because you are either taking a flat 25% damage reduction or you're healing for a third of the damage you're doing for the 4 seconds that you're unleashed, which is just insane. You will do less damage though because you are sitting in that 25% damage reduction more often. As you become more familiar with the spec, you'll dynamically use both of these types of cycle depending on the damage incoming and if you need to squeeze out maximum DPS yourself. Okay, so that's the build. As you can see, it can very easily kill Legendary Bounties. I soloed quite a few in the process of making this video, and I was still learning the bounty abilities as I'm still new to Guild Wars 2. You won't do as high DPS as some specs can do solo, but if you play correctly, you can survive just about anything with the crazy healing that it can do. I will note that during all these videos, I had a mix of exotic Berserkers, Celestial and Diviners gear with only a few Ascended Trinkets, and I can't afford some of the expensive runes yet, so my DPS is still far from optimized. You'll get a little bit more out if you have full Legendaries and Ascended and everything. So if you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. This is a new channel, so it helps out massively. Cheers.